Hi, it's Dawn from Dawn's Dirt. And as you all know, welcome to my podcast. And we talk about gardening, we talk about life, we talk about politics, we talk about religion, we talk about anything that could be dirt in our lives. And so today, on today's episode, I've got Dan Giercke, and very excited to have him here. He's with Solid Financial Solutions. And so welcome here, Dan. Could you tell me a little bit about your business and what you do?
Sure, yeah. I'm happy to join you here on Dawn's Dirt. Let's get into the dirt today. I'm a rep with Solid Financial Solutions. It's a small family business based in Red Deer. I started out as a customer back in 2009, and we'll maybe get into the reasons why as we go along. And I've been a referral partner and a rep for them ever since. We're a little different than most precious metals brokers. We're not married to the asset. So we happen to be gold and silver brokers at the time. But more importantly, we're wealth cycles people. We study history, we study financial economics, and the most important thing is knowing wealth cycles, which is a fancy way of saying we help our clients buy low and sell high, and then sell high and buy low again. So we're more about the cycle. It just happens that we're in a precious metal cycle now. And so that's why we're in that space.
Okay, I like that. So can you tell me, so that's the thing, like I would love to have this conversation. We'll just break it down little bit by little bit because I sometimes lack comprehension. And so I'm just going to ask you lots of questions. So what's a wealth cycle? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So one of the things we learn from studying history is that most people don't learn from history. And we go through these cycles time and again. What goes up tends to come down, and then it goes back up again. And so I mentioned earlier that I started out as a customer of Solid Financial back in 2009. I met Brad Fisher at a conference in 2007, and then summer of 2008, he was one of three people that I've kind of looked up to as mentors that came to me and said, there's a storm brewing in the markets in the U.S. You might want to get out. You might think about buying some silver. And it was a foreign concept to me. I had been investing in mutual funds and my RRSP since I was 19 years old. Thought I kind of understood what I was doing, did what my advisors told me. And so I went to my advisor at the time and I said, here's what I'm hearing. What do you think? And she said, oh, no, you're in the best place you could possibly be. Just sit tight. Well, that was the end of a cycle. It was a real estate primarily boom and then bust that led to the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So going through that and taking the losses that I took because I didn't do anything, turned on a light bulb for me that there were people out there that knew things I didn't know, saw what was coming, and why didn't I see what was coming? And so I knew I needed to understand that better. And so I became a customer, first of all. Now, I made a mistake there, too, is that when I talked earlier, a wealth cycle is about buying low and selling high. Well, I sold low. I wrote that down and then I sold out, which was another mistake that I learned the hard way. And so now I focus on looking for where's the opportunity to buy low. And so, what came after that was another opportunity to buy low is that after the real estate market crashed in the U.S., Brad and his clients were investing in homes in Phoenix, Arizona. They were buying bank-owned properties. Down there, you could get 4 houses for the price of 1 up here. And so they bought a bunch of properties with investors' funds, waited for the market to come back, and sold those at a really nice profit. So that was another cycle that we went through. Currently, another mentor of mine, Mike Maloney, you're probably familiar with Robert Kiyosaki, the guy that wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Well, his precious metals guy is a guy by the name of Mike Maloney. And he wrote a book here last year called The Great Gold and Silver Rush of the 21st Century. And he talks about the almost everything bubble. And that's how he describes what we're in right now. Stock market's at an all-time high. Real estate's at an all-time high. The bond market's actually at an all-time high, and it's really unusual for all of those categories to be high at the same time. Usually there's some of this going on. When one's high, another's low. And so that's why he calls it the almost everything bubble. And there's a number of reasons driving that. A big part of it is just the way our system is designed. It's a debt-based system, and so we just have to keep creating currency to keep it alive. And that's what's driving these bubbles. And so really the only opportunity that we see in our view anyway to get in at a low is in the precious metals world. And when we go through these cycles, the one we're up against right now is what's known as a super cycle. They happen about every 100 years, which is obviously, You don't see too many of those in your lifetime. You might see one, and that's what we're up against right now. The last one that people will think of is what we know of as the Great Depression. That was the last major supercycle. And what happened then? 8,000 or 9,000 banks failed. Stock market dropped 80 to 90%. Real estate market dropped 50% or more, depending on where you were. And really, we know it as a time of food lines and unemployment and the dirty 30s and really difficult times. But there was a small percentage of the people that saw that coming and positioned themselves properly. And there were more millionaires created in that period than ever before in history. That's the part we don't hear about.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So what you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is you're saying that we are in the pre-dirty 30s, in your opinion, and that the cycle will like it'll all crash at some point. And is gold and silver down in price right now, or up, or what's your thoughts on that? Like, because you're in gold and silver. That's how we started talking, is we were talking about gold and silver, and should I, invest in gold and silver? So
that's a great question. So you probably heard, if you're watching the news at all, that gold's hitting all-time highs here recently. And in paper dollars, it is. It's at its all-time high. Here in Canada, I think we're a little over $3,700 an ounce this morning when I looked. So based in paper dollars, we're at an all-time high. But actually, if you look at what that gold will buy as far as physical goods, you'd actually get more oil in the 70s for your gold than you do today. So silver reached an all-time high of $50 US in 1980, and we're at about 2/3 of that price today. So I don't know too many assets that you can go out and acquire today for 2/3 of its 1980 value. So silver, in my view especially, is a really rare situation for us to have an opportunity to acquire an asset at not much above what it costs to pull it out of the ground and refine it.
Okay, so silver was $50 in 1980, and what is it now?
In Canadian dollars, we're at, I think, 43-ish. So US, it's under $40 an ounce still, mid-30s.
Okay, so silver is actually
very often, so I don't have it off the top of my head, but Canadian dollars, we're at 43 right now. Convert that to US, it's probably, you'd be looking at 30, 35-ish.
Okay, so silver is at a low. If I'm just saying everything back to you just so that I can comprehend it, and just so that I'm catching it all. So silver is at a low, and so in your opinion, it's better to buy silver than gold right now?
That is my preference for sure. And I guess I should preface this that I'm not a financial advisor or a planner, so I'm not here to advise or recommend. I'll share what I'm doing and, hopefully educate, because that's our goal. Is we want to help people make educated and informed decisions. So that's our primary focus, is on the education piece. I lean heavily towards silver. I have bought very little gold in the last number of years, and I keep acquiring silver because it holds its value. So I look at it first and foremost as insurance. It holds its purchasing power. A silver coin in Roman times would buy you a chicken. That same silver coin today would buy you a chicken. Your $20 bill in your pocket won't buy you today what it bought you 6 months ago. So our currency in our pockets is losing value every day. Precious metals has held its value throughout history. And when we go through these cycles, it also appreciates substantially because everybody flocks back to what has always been money, which is gold and silver. 5,000 years of history have proven that that's what people regard as having value.
Yes. Okay. So this is my thought process. See, I was a farmer. I had a farm. I had the land. I had the vegetables. I had the chickens. I had the sheep. I was asset rich and cash. I never had money in my bank, or if I did, I had lots of money in my bank, and then I paid my bills, and I had negative money in my bank, because that's farming. You almost sometimes spend more than what you gain in agriculture, but you are asset rich, which was my farm and my tractors and my vehicles and my greenhouse and my land and my animals. So those were my assets. And so now selling my farm, I have a tiny little bit of money in the bank, but I'm looking at that and going like, yes, what happens? And I'm not trying to doomsday prep. Like, I wear a small tinfoil hat, but I hope I'm wrong. And so I just think, man, if something happened, what do I have? And a dollar amount in a computer someplace just is, for me, if I have all of my dollars in a computer someplace, that's just a little bit scary because I'm used to working on an asset, like where I have assets and not dollars. And so that's why that's why we talked, is because I'm thinking maybe I should take some of my little bit of the asset that I have in my bank and put it into an asset that I can hold in my hand. And so when you deal in silver and gold, are you actually getting a physical gold or silver, or are you getting a number on a piece of paper or a number in a computer?
Yeah, I love that question. So yes, we deal physically in gold and silver. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but things like this, that's a 1 ounce buffalo round is what.
And what is that?
An ounce of pure silver. This is produced from a mint in the U.S. called the Sunshine Mint. It's the one we primarily deal with, but we deal with all the largest mints and mines on the planet. So the ones with the highest reputation. So actually, I'd kind of like to talk a little bit about how we got to this situation. And when you talk about your cash in the bank, and being concerned about potentiality, I don't want to scare anyone and be a doomsday kind of forecaster, but at the same time, Brad, our founder, talks about being the smack upside the head. Sometimes people need just to see what's actually going on. So let's talk about how we got here and look at a little bit of history. So the system we're in now is a fiat system, which basically means backed by nothing. And this current iteration got started back in 1913 with the founding of the passing of the Federal Reserve Act. You've probably heard of the Federal Reserve Bank out of the U.S. It's the central bank for the United States. It's not federal. It doesn't have any reserves, and it's not a bank. It's a private institution that essentially issues IOUs as a blank checkbook, if you will. And they issue currency to the government in exchange for the government's IOUs. So they just swap paper is all they really do. Now, initially, when it was set up, it was passed through Congress on December 22nd of 1913. Most of Congress was home for Christmas, obviously, and so they slid it through the House. And it was set up by a consortium of private bankers. They had secret meetings. There's a book on it that's really good. I highly recommend, called The Creature from Jekyll Island, about how these guys all got together in private, pretended they were going duck hunting and only used their first names, and a lot of secrecy around it. But the end result was they created, in essence, a two-pronged objective, and that was, number one, to enslave the government, and number two, to enslave the people. And unfortunately, they've been really successful at that. So what that allowed them to do, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I would like to play devil's advocate for 1 second here. So there is, so you've said there's a book, but there is other sources to say that this actually happened. I'm assuming they are rich people.
They are the heads of the big banks at the time, of the private banks. So These are guys like JP Morgan. There were fellows from the Rockefeller or Rothschild banks in Europe. All these kind of guys who met at Jekyll Island and put this together, designed this. It was actually the third central bank in the U.S. So this was the third crack at it.
Okay, so they got together and they decided that I'm just trying to understand. They would get together, they would form the bank, they would loan the government money, but it's not even real money, it's paper money or just a promise or a whisper or whatever it is, and then the government would owe them. And so it started where the money is not necessarily worth money. Am I getting that right?
At the time, all dollars on the planet, or all currency on the planet, was backed. The reserve currency on the planet at that time was the pound sterling out of the UK, which is a precious metals backed currency. And the Federal Reserve initially was a precious metal backed currency as well, in order for people to have faith in it. If you see old bills, they actually say silver certificate on it. So you could walk into your bank And it was basically a claim check, just like when you go to a concert and you check your coat at the coat check, they give you a little piece of paper that represents your coat in their closet.
Okay, so the piece of paper that we have now, or the piece of paper that they had then, was actually representative of a piece of silver or a piece of gold. It was a hard asset versus paper. I'm understanding that correctly? And right now, our paper that we have, or plastic here in Canada, there is no silver or gold to back it. It's just a piece of paper.
Exactly.
And a number in a computer.
So what happened is that slowly over time is that convertibility to gold, or that backing, was whittled down until 1971. Richard Nixon, in a public address, severed the convertibility of the U.S. dollar to gold. So here's the analogy that I learned the other day, actually, that I quite like, that really illustrates how well this works. So back during the Second World War, the Bretton Woods Conference was held. And essentially what this was the British pound was no longer a strong currency because of the effects of the war. And so all the leaders of the Allies got together in the U.S. at a place called Bretton Woods. That's why it's called the Bretton Woods Conference. And they decided that because the U.S. had all the gold, and that's a product of the war, all the European nations were sending their gold to the U.S. in exchange for tanks and planes and bullets and everything else, all the supplies that the U.S. was the industrial powerhouse, and the battlefront wasn't on their land. So they had all the value, essentially, that they were shipping over to the other countries. But all the gold was getting shipped to the U.S. So they were seen as this not only industrial powerhouse, but also the financial powerhouse of the world. And so the U.S. became the reserve currency on the planet as a result of that Bretton Woods Conference. But the agreement was, and I want you to picture this. So imagine a helium balloon with a string hanging down from it. It's tied to a brick of gold. So that essentially was the U.S. dollar's relationship. Here's our dollar. It's a piece of paper, but it's got a tie directly to this brick of gold. And then every other nation's currency on the planet, essentially, was another balloon tied to that American balloon. So now picture a halo of balloons, whether it was German or British or France or any of the other countries that were tied to this American balloon, because it's now the reserve currency. Everything else is tied to it, but it's tied to gold. Well, in 1971, what Nixon essentially did is took a pair of scissors and snipped that bottom string. So now they're all floating. They're not tied to anything. They're not anchored to anything. It's fully fiat. And what we learn by looking at history is that all fiat currencies fail, 100%. There hasn't been one in history that ever survived.
Okay, can you just name one previous fiat currency as an example that has grown and failed?
One of my favorite examples is fairly recent, and that's Zimbabwe. They were printing $100 trillion notes. So you think of a $20 bill. They had a $100 trillion note, and that wouldn't buy you a carton of eggs. It was worthless. They went into hyperinflation.
Because it was just a paper bill.
Yeah, the thing is with fiat currencies is that they're debt-based. And so what governments tend to do is they try and increase the amount of currency in circulation so they can pay off their debts with these cheaper dollars. But eventually they reach a tipping point where inflation kicks in, which is what we're seeing here lately. Inflation kicks in and it speeds up, and they just have to speed up the printing presses to try and keep up. And it's just a snowball that I think it was Mark Twain that said, how do people go bankrupt? Well, slowly over time and then suddenly all at once. That's how a fiat currency fails too. They have an average lifespan of about 31 years. We're in uncharted territory because for the first time in history, the reserve currency on the planet is fiat. So that's never happened before. And two, because of that relationship, the U.S. has been able to export their inflation to other nations. So they send their paper dollars overseas and they collect goods from other countries, other companies, that sort of thing. And so 70% of the bills on the planet are American dollars. the actual physical bills.
Okay.
But they're not in the U.S. They're all over the world because the world's been forced to use U.S. dollars for trade.
Right. Okay. So now you're not a financial planner, but in your prediction by studying history and studying all these things. So right now the US, if I'm understanding it, the US has all of their paper money out into other countries. And you can see that when you go to another country, you usually bring American bills and you buy things and trade for their money in those bills. And so what will happen? So they've got all their money out, they're getting goods back. So from different countries, China or wherever. And so what is, and then if you look at the Americans, or even if you look at Canadians, we're all in debt. Like we've got debt. We're stacked in debt. So if you had a crystal ball and could predict the future, what would you predict might or could happen?
Well, what history teaches us is that these currencies fail and have always failed, and we go through cycles. So even reserve currencies, they typically last about 70 years. So we're at the end of that cycle. So I guess what I would say is it's not so much a prediction. It's what has history taught us about what happens in these scenarios. And again, I'll go back to that super cycle. It happens about every 100 years. If you go back through history, all the way back, about every 100 years, we go through a cycle like this. The difference this time around is that for the first time ever, the fiat currency is the reserve currency, and that hasn't happened before. So the British pound was backed by precious metals. The French, when France held the reserve status, their currency was backed by precious metals. This is the first time we've gone off of that, so we're in uncharted territory. Like I said, the historical average for a fiat currency is about 31 years. We're at 50 plus now. So we're long overdue. But what I think we're seeing is that the further down the road the can gets kicked, the bigger the impact it'll have. And when these pendulum swings happen, when the pendulum's way up here, it doesn't just come back down to the bottom and stop. It tends to swing way high the other side. So I think my expectation is that we're going to go through a major correction in all those markets that are in bubbles. You look at the stock market hitting all-time highs in the middle of the COVID lockdowns. How does that make any sense? If all the businesses are closed, how are they raking in record profits? The reason was currency creation. The Federal Reserve turned on the printing presses and was flooding those companies with currency to make the stock market look attractive, to maintain the facade. And that's where we're at now.
Well, and you even saw that in COVID here in Canada, the government was handing out money left, right, and center. Oh, here's a little for you, and here's a little for you, and have some COVID cash, and have some COVID cash. And that wasn't necessarily money. That was just numbers in a computer someplace. Right?
And we're feeling the effects of that. So the difference between the COVID cash, if you will, and what was done, they called it quantitative easing in the great financial crisis. That was money printing then too. They bailed out all the banks. And so the difference was that money went into the big corporations' pockets in the great financial crisis. During COVID, they turned on the printing presses, but handed the money out on the street. Every man, woman, and child was getting cash. Well, now we're feeling those effects, and that's why we're having inflation kicking in big time. The government's official numbers are single digits, 4, 5, 6%. But the reality is, if you go to the grocery store or put gas in your car, you know that inflation is 25 or more percent.
Right.
So that's a product of more dollars chasing fewer goods. That's the end result of all that money printing that they did.
Right. And so, so we've been handed all this cash during COVID. We've got a government now that is promising more money. And so he's handing out even more money in the next few months here in Canada. And so what that will do is it will eventually just turn it into Zimbabwe money, where it just, yes, you got, your $250, but now a chicken's going to cost $250 instead of $30. Is that kind of the cycle that you predict? Yeah,
so I think we're seeing what the governments are willing to do, and that they don't want to make the hard decision, which would be to default on their obligations or default on any of their debt. They're making the kick the can down the road decision and hope it impacts the next administration, not mine. And so their strategy seems to be that let's just inflate the amount of currency in circulation. Let's just keep printing dollars and we'll keep rolling our debt over. So when their debt comes due, when they sell government bonds or they buy them themselves, they have a term, they come due. And so that's what caused a lot of the bank failures here in the US in the last year, is that they bought bonds when they were 1 or 2%. And then because of inflation, the bond prices went up to 5 or 6%, and now they were underwater because their 1 or 2% bonds were essentially worthless on the market. And so a bunch of people started calling loans, and the banks failed overnight. We actually saw more bank failure amount last year than during the great financial crisis, but it was only a handful of banks. So we talk about $1 trillion, but I don't know anybody that can wrap their head around what $1 trillion actually is. It's 1,000 billion. A million's a big number, and a billion's 1,000 of those. So if you go online, you can do a search for visual representations of $1 trillion, and it's a football field of stacks of $100 bills on double high stacked pallets. It's insane. And it took 200 years for the U.S. to create their first $1 trillion of debt, and now they do it every 90 days. And soon they'll do it every 60 days, and then every 30 days, and then it'll be every week. So it's a snowball. And again, I go back to that snowball analogy. It's rolling down the hill, and it starts off slow, but as it picks up speed, it goes faster and faster and faster, and then you can't stop it.
And so eventually it will have to come to a stop, because what's happening is the average person, is finding it harder and harder and harder and harder to survive. And we've seen that in history, in several different times in history, where it just gets harder and harder and the noose gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And eventually something has to give, because when you have people going hungry, you've got a problem. And I guess that's where I come in, is I'm teaching people how to grow food, which to me, if the bank fails, and my biggest fear moving off of my farm actually was, if the bank failed and you don't have grocery stores and you don't have, a way to pay with a debit card at a bank and get groceries, what will I feed my family? And so that's where I've kind of shifted and pivoted to teaching people how to grow. But I'm also been able to land on this little property where I have a little greenhouse myself. I have a little garden myself. I have some chickens myself. And that's where I started talking to you, is because I'm like, if the bank failed, if paper money is worth nothing, how will I survive? And it is a bit of doomsday prepping, and I don't want to do that fully, but I just feel like it's not going to hurt me to have some vegetables in my backyard. It's not going to hurt me to have some chickens in my backyard. And I'm at a point now where that's where we talked, is I feel like it's not going to hurt if I'm able to have some savings right now, which I'm thankful I am, to put that into a physical asset, because at the end of the day is my understanding that physical silver coin is not necessarily going to fully lose its value the same way as a paper dollar will. Or am I out to lunch?
Yeah, it never has in history, so I don't foresee a scenario where it would be worthless. And I want to commend you on food. So as much as I talk about gold and silver, I think food and water is far more important. So I don't think it's necessarily doomsday. I think just in the times we're in the state of the world we're in, I mean, they're talking World War III and nuclear weapons on the news every day, which is insane to me, but I think it's prudent to prepare. Look what happened during COVID in the toilet paper fiasco. Why everybody wanted to hoard toilet paper is beyond me, but we saw very quickly how quickly the supply chain ran out. I've heard a number of times that grocery stores have about 3 days worth of supply if things shut down. So for those that are reliant on a grocery store, if you live in a big city and things go, electricity goes down for a couple of days, people panic. And if you don't have a little bit of food and water on hand just to hunker down and stay safe at home, I think you're taking a big risk. So first and foremost for me is food and water and shelter. And then let's worry about your finances. Got to get your priorities in order first. Yeah, I agree with you on if you've got money in the bank, silver's, I don't think it's going anywhere. The thing with silver today, especially, is that it's an industrial precious metal. So when people think of gold, they picture two things primarily, and that its primary uses are bricks that are in a bank vault and jewelry. Those are the two fundamental primary uses for gold on the planet. A little bit of industrial use, but not nearly as much. Silver, on the other hand, does those things and then 1,000 other things. It's nature's best conductor of heat and electricity, so it's in all electronics. It's now in every solar panel. So the big green energy push is using silver like crazy. For the batteries, Samsung just announced their solid-state battery, and it uses a whole bunch of silver. More than a traditional electric battery does. Solar panels, all the infrastructure, the grid, the electrical grid uses silver. Electric cars use more silver than internal combustion. Medical devices use it. And here's the big one, the military industrial complex uses it like crazy too. There's 500 ounces of silver in a Tomahawk missile that goes into the tip of that and gets obliterated. It vaporizes. So we don't recover that silver either.
Okay, so even if we get past the doomsday prepping, which hopefully we're wrong, silver is going up in value in your prediction anyway in all of these green energy type ways. And so it's a physical asset that will probably appreciate in value, not depreciate in value. And so in your opinion, right. So in your opinion, if you're going to invest at this moment, you're investing, and we're not talking tinfoil hat doomsday prepping, we're just talking investment only. You would invest in the precious metals because those, in your prediction, will appreciate if we just keep on status quo here.
Yeah, I think people are realizing that their paper dollars are losing value. They're not holding their value. So if let's say you've got $100,000 sitting in your bank account today. If inflation is truly at 25%, which I think it is that or more, real inflation, not government statistic manipulated inflation. If that's the case, then a year from now you still have $100,000 and maybe a bit of interest, but will it buy you $100,000 worth of stuff next year? It'll buy you $75,000 worth of stuff next year. Now, how much money do you have to earn to put another $25,000 back in your bank account before tax? You got to earn another $40,000 or $50,000 to put $25,000 in the bank account. Do that 4 years, your $100,000 is down to zero if inflation stays at 25%.
Right.
So again, for me, it's purchasing power protection. It's an insurance policy against the loss of your purchasing power with the paper dollars. And when we go through these cycles, as people realize their paper's losing value, they flock back to what they know has always had value. And that's when they tend to go into gold and silver. And Mike Maloney talks about silver and gold becoming unaffordable and unattainable at some point. Because when we go through these cycles, when everybody on the street is talking about getting their hands on it, it's going to be hard to get your hands on it. We're not there yet, but we could be very quickly. And so that's why in these cycles, 90% of the move that gold and silver make happened in the last 10%. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you saw Al Gore's documentary on climate change, but he gets on a scissor lift and he's showing a chart of how things go exponential in the last bit of the cycle. What it's similar in these situations too, is that at some point the curve goes vertical and straight up. And so 90% of that move happens in the very end of that cycle.
Okay. And so I just bring this back again. As I'm hearing you talk and as I'm listening, I'm looking at it as physical assets. I bring it back to my farm. I had food, I had chickens, I had sheep, I had my land, I had my house, I had my car. I had physical assets. I didn't have money in the bank. Money in the bank can be volatile. We've seen that in crashes in, the stock markets and things like that. And now I'm sitting here thinking, something went sideways, I will still have a physical asset. And as you were talking here, I was thinking, land and housing, real estate is typically an asset of someone's. It does go up and down a bit, but it in general appreciates. And we've had crashes, but if you kind of stick to the course, or if you own your house, you can kind of come through that. And I just think if a house is unattainable for someone right now, if you have an extra $50 that you can invest in a silver coin, it's the same. It's an asset that someone can physically hold. And so what's your thoughts on that? Because maybe a house isn't attainable. Maybe, car isn't. Cars, I feel like, are a waste of money right now. But they depreciate. They don't appreciate. But a silver coin, maybe that's so for someone who doesn't have a lot of money or a lot of assets or a lot of buying power, maybe that's the way they should go. I feel like they should also plant a garden, because that's an asset to themselves. They can make money back by saving on their grocery bill. They'll turn a package of seeds into a whole bunch of food, which will save them thousands, eventually. And it's a skill set that you can pass down. So in your thought, a silver coin, same thing?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question and a great segue into, maybe I'll talk a little bit about some examples of that. So one thing we know about wealth is that it doesn't disappear, it transfers. So all these trillions of dollars that are out there aren't going to vanish. That value has to go somewhere. And so when I talked about the Great Depression, the question to ask yourself is, where did all that wealth go? And what we talk about quite often is that the world is transitioning now from a world of wants to a world of needs. People are very quickly realizing what really matters. Paying for the house and the utilities and the grocery bill are more important than maybe going to the movies or the hockey game or whatever. Those things are discretionary. And if your business isn't focused on the needs of the people, you might be in trouble. And so your business is perfectly aligned, because food is a high item on the list. So what happened back in the Great Depression is that those that saw what was coming moved onto the sidelines. And it said if you had 24 ounce in those days, you could walk into downtown Berlin, Germany, and buy an entire city block of downtown Berlin real estate. 24 ounces of gold today is not even $100,000. So that value transferred into what actually had value, which was a real tangible asset, because people couldn't get gold anywhere else anymore, and they needed it to buy food. And so the guy that had the gold had a lot of leverage. I was reading a couple other examples here the other day. There was a fellow working as a waiter in a restaurant in Germany, and he served an American businessman at that time, and the guy tipped him a gold coin. Well, he went next door and bought a townhouse with it. So
wow.
You can't buy a mobile home in Canada right now for $100,000 on a piece of land, really?
No.
Could you buy a city block of real estate for $100,000? It can't even wrap your head around that right now.
No.
If we go through a wealth transfer like I think we're going to go through, that'll become reality again. And another example I like to share. So back in 1970, the average price of a house was about $20,000. And so let's say you had just inherited another house. You have your home that you live in, and you just inherited another house. And I'll give you three options. Do you keep that house for 10 years? Do you sell that house and buy gold with the money that you get from the house? Or do you sell that house and buy silver with the money you get from that house? Those are your three options. And then we'll look 10 years in the distance and see how you made out. What's your
Well, after talking to you, I'm probably going to buy it in silver, but I guess it would depend on the numbers, because it's all a numbers game, and you're looking backwards. So you're looking at history and what history did. So I'm assuming that you're going to give us the answer of what those three options are going to be, or what they turned out to be. I'm curious about your, I'm curious about your answer. So what did they do?
All right. Well, I'll just give you the lowdown then. So 10 years went by, and this is fairly common for real estate, as it doubles in value every 10 years. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's fairly consistent. The value of homes tend to go up, and that's product of inflation, really. It's nothing to do with the a house being any better. It's just that our currency buys less.
Yeah.
So it costs twice as much to buy the house. So it went up a little over 2 times. The house was worth about $50,000 in 1980.
Okay. Yep.
If you had bought gold, you could have bought 8 houses in 1980 at 1980 prices.
Wow.
If you bought silver, you could have bought 18 houses.
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy.
So silver went on a run from about $2 up to $50, which was its all-time high. And so, yeah, there were people that actually, there were a couple of brothers that tried to corner that whole market, which is a whole other story, but they were buying silver like crazy. So that's an example of a wealth cycle and how that wealth transfers.
Okay. So really, at the end of the day here, I'm feeling like a lot of people see, and a lot of my listeners see the volatility in the world right now. We're on the brink of World War III. We've had COVID. We've seen what governments do. There's power and control issues, in my opinion. And people are looking for needs, not wants. That's all happening. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is it's best to invest in. I'm of the opinion, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And so that's what I'm doing. If you give a man a package of seeds and teach him how to grow it, he'll eat for a lifetime. And then with your money that you're saving on food, because you're growing your own food, you could invest in some gold and silver, have it in, a shoebox in your backyard. And eventually that investment might buy you 18 houses.
Maybe. That's entirely possible. Yeah, and like I rent right now, I think the real estate market is out of reach for a lot of people. It's at an all-time high. I'm expecting it to correct in a big way. I think we'll see we're already hearing about Toronto and Vancouver bubbles popping and their market is coming down, but not to any extent like I think it could. Do I wish that on anybody? No, but I think at the same time, what we're seeing today with all the things going on in the world is just a product of all these systems failing. And unfortunately, they were kind of designed to fail. It's a debt-based system. And in order to replace the debt, like if you pay off the debt, if everybody were to pay off all the debt that's out there right now, there wouldn't be a dollar in existence because that first dollar came with interest. And the dollar to pay the interest was never created. So if you paid off all the debt, there wouldn't be any currency on the planet. It's hard to wrap your head around that.
So I just heard you say that you are renting your home, and I'm making a little bit of an assumption that you have a little bit of an asset then, and your asset you have put into gold and silver, not into the bank. Is that kind of the trajectory or the position you are putting yourself and your family in?
Yeah, there's 2 schools of thought. You've probably heard that don't put all your eggs in one basket philosophy. And then there's put all the eggs in one basket and guard it like crazy. So Robert Kiyosaki talks about this, and you mentioned it earlier too, that a lot of people think their home is an asset, but his definition of an asset is something that puts money in your pocket. If your home isn't generating income, it's not an asset, it's a liability. And we all need a place to live. There's no doubt about that, but it's a choice on where do you want to put that money? And so for me, primarily my focus is silver. That's where I focus right now on protecting my savings. I think there'll be a time where I'm a landowner and a homeowner again. I look forward to that day. I prefer that. But I just don't think it makes sense to pay all-time highs for a piece of real estate. I look at what I paid for my first home as a 19-year-old. My brother and I bought a townhouse, and we paid, I think it was $78,000. I don't know what you can buy for that today. It's not much. You might be able to cover the rent on a room for a year. Like it's crazy.
You can't even buy
today.
You can't even buy a car right now. This is sorry, I get a little squirrely, but I Vehicles. I am so frustrated with the vehicle market right now. Everyone thinks you have to have a fancy new car. And I'm like, what a waste of money. That thing depreciates faster than you can say go to. And by the time you've got all the electronics in there and all the things that can go wrong, they break. And you hear of people buying a brand new vehicle and then the motor goes out. And then, usually what's the word called? Like when you warranty.
Oh, the warranty.
And then and then the warranty will kick in and they'll replace it, but it already broke once. So when's it going to break again? So I'm so frustrated with the vehicle market. The unfortunate part is you have to have a vehicle to get someplace nowadays. So I don't know, that's a little squirrel thought, but so the thing
maybe it's a tinfoil hat in me too, but I've been looking at older vehicles again, because they have less electronics and less parts that can fail. So I drive an old truck. I've got an old F-150 that I've been driving. It's 2005. It's almost 20 years old, but it works. It does what I need it to. And my wife's vehicle is an older SUV. I kind of subscribe to Kiyosaki's philosophy that an asset is something that puts money in your pocket. So I look for assets, and cars and homes are not assets in my view, unless they're somehow producing an income. If you're an Uber driver, your car's an asset. If you're an Airbnb entrepreneur and you rent out rooms in your house and it's paying your mortgage, well then, that's an asset. If it's just costing you money, covering your mortgage and your utilities every month, that's not an asset.
Right. So I guess we could bring it back to my farm. And this is kind of what I'm thinking at this moment right now is when I had my farm, by the time I sold my farm a year ago, or just it'll be a year in January, I was $1 million. Me personally, single mom, I was $1 million in debt. Now my farm did generate money, so that is an asset. But at the same time, I lost $100,000 farming last year, so it didn't make sense for me to go forward. And I just feel like at this moment, maybe the Lord was looking after me, and I sold everything, paid off and I'm thankful to not be in debt at this moment. And I have
weight off your shoulders, I bet.
It's huge. And the cost of living right now, living in the mobile home, I live in a mobile home. In the mobile home that I'm living in is so small. And I don't know that I'd be surviving right now if it wasn't for my situation that I landed in. And I'm very thankful at this moment for it, because I have a roof over my head. I have chickens in my backyard. I have a garden. I have seeds. I actually saved seeds from the farm, and I have seeds that even if the seeds went sideways, I have several years worth of food just in seeds. And so
here's something to consider. Maybe your timing was just right. So think about all the people that locked in their mortgage for 5 years in 2020 when rates were at 1 or less than 2%. Like, those numbers are unheard of if you go back through history. Our historical average is between 6 and 8%. And what are rates today for all those people that are going to have to renew in the next year?
Yeah, it's gone crazy.
Mortgage just doubled, and they're having trouble making the payment now. So what does that do to real estate?
Yes. And so that's part of why I had to sell my farm too, is I didn't lock in. And so suddenly those interest payments the interest went higher, and suddenly my payments went higher to the tune of $30,000 in a year. And so, I just knew in my gut, and it was probably the Lord telling me that I had to sell. And so that's what I've done. And I don't understand why. I understand what I was able to do with the food. I was able to give away food. But I'm just at this pivoting point, and there's I suspect there's a bigger picture to it. And so,
There's another factor to consider. So we're all familiar with baby boomers. You and I are probably children of baby boomers. Well, I am. There's 75 million of those in the U.S. I don't know what the number is in Canada, probably 7 or 8 million. We're about 10% of their population. What are all of them doing right now? Retiring. What have they been doing for the last 50 years? They've been working and saving and building a nest egg. Well, when they retire, what are they going to start doing? They're going to live off that savings. They're going to start pulling out of the market. They're not going to be putting in anymore. They're going to be sitting on a nest egg and withdrawing every month from that nest egg. Well, what does that do to our stock market, for one? there's 3 people pulling out for every 1 putting in, which direction does it have to go?
It's going to have to go down.
It has to. I don't see a scenario where it doesn't. So there's that. There's 3 baby boomers looking to downsize, probably. They're selling off the family home and buying a smaller place for just the 2 of them. So if there's 3 sellers for every buyer in the market, what does that do to real estate?
It's going to make it go down. So everything, I see where you're going with this. Everything will have to shift. And you can just see when we're talking about it, and it's so simple. It like we're putting it in very simple terms. It has to shift. It will shift down here at some point.
Well, if you look back through their life, that baby boomer demographic drove the economy right from their birth. The diapers, the high chairs, the baby food, that industry boomed. And then it was toys, and then it was cars and homes, and all of those things boomed because of that demographic moving through our economy. Well, they have a major impact, and now they're at the point of their life. I think the last baby boomers retire in the next 2 years.
Yes.
So that whole segment of the population now, rather than contribute, now starts living off of what they've worked so hard to create.
Well, and their mentality was totally different. Their mentality was so different. You worked for what you had. You earned it, and you didn't necessarily, I mean, yes, you'd maybe have a mortgage, but you didn't really spend outside of your means. And so they've worked hard, they've saved, now they're spending their savings. I can see that with my mom, spending her savings. And I think that's fantastic. And that's great for all these baby boomers, but you're right. And now we've got a younger generation who a lot of times, and I'm not trying to just paint a broad brushstroke and be mean here, but a lot of the younger generation don't necessarily want to work as hard. They think that things are owed to them, and they're not saving the same way as what that generation did. And they're going into debt, to buy $1 million house and go into debt, $800,000 on it. Like, it's just like, oh yeah, I can get the money. But at some point, that scale, like we've been talking about this whole time, is going to have to tip, and what's going to be the fallout of it. And yeah, I guess bring it back to, as we wrap up here, bring it back to gold and silver. So
yeah, I think we're long overdue for a big correction is the bottom line. And I just hope and pray that we can help as many people as possible prepare for what's coming. First through, Brad likes to say, how do you get out of the way of a tsunami or a tidal wave you don't see coming? So first and foremost, let's open some eyes to what's going on and help people see what's coming, and then make informed decisions on what's right for them. If I can help them, fantastic. If they're happy with someone else, that's great too. I just hope that they see what's coming and prepare for it, and hopefully prosper because of it.
I love that. Well, and I'll just wrap it up with this. So that's my thought process. If you have an extra $50, you can buy one silver coin, right? Ish. Yep. One silver coin.
Yeah.
And so that's just like an insurance policy in your pocket. It's something that probably will appreciate, because we've seen that over and over in history. And so, yeah, it's just preparing for the worst case scenario. And if we're wrong, if everything just stays okay and we don't have a crash, that silver coin will probably appreciate because it's an asset, and you can trade it in, 10 years from now for 2 silver coins or whatever it might be. So Cole's Notes version, it'll work like that. So I love it. Yeah. So great analogies, great conversation. And so can you let our listeners know, Dan, where can they find you? Because I feel like if someone listens to this, I know I want to put some of my dollars that I have in a computer system someplace in a bank into silver or gold. So where can people find you, and how can we do this? Yeah,
great. So first recommendation, the best recommendation is I'll just give you my cell phone number and you can text or call me. So it's 403-818. And if you want to go check out our website, it's solidfinancialsolutions.ca. There's a bunch of information on there, but again, reach out to me directly and I'll do my best to help you out. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Okay, I love it. Now, one quick last question, just off the top here, because I grilled you the other day. We talked on the phone and I grilled you because I'm the type of person that I'm going to question everything. So I said, how do I know if I'm buying gold or silver from you that it's not just some fake gold or silver bar or silver, coin that you just, picked up at the toy store. So how do I know it's truthful? How do I know I actually am getting what I'm getting? So that's one quick question.
Well, sure. So first and foremost, we buy directly from the mints themselves. So our product comes brand new. Your hands will be the first human hands to touch them. That's the first piece that's important to know. We're not reselling other product bought back from the public. And the second thing is, once it's in your hand, I'll give you a phone call and I'll teach you how to test it. How's that?
Okay. I love that. Looking after the people. And yeah, because people don't want to get screwed over. We're screwed over enough by the government. Sorry to say that right now. But yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. I really appreciate your time. Great education, lots to think about. And yeah, I'm just going to continue to think and ponder and pray and find out what my next moves are. So thank you so much for being here today.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Keep doing great work. Feed the people.
Thank you. It's so important.